Welcome. My name is Cedric Marin. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer at Fulltime Immigration Law. Having some technical issues. I see a lot of people are watching live right now. So we can talk about express entry, how to immigrate to Canada. Let's dive right in it. As I mentioned, I've been quite busy, so I apologize. I'm running a few minutes late and I had a few technical issues earlier. Let's get going. Let's talk about the very first question. Nikhil, thank you for this question. So as some of you may know, you might be able to work in Canada more than 20 hours per week if you have a study permit. But there are some very, very specific rules that apply to this change. And so your question, Nikhil, you're asking me, you're saying, I applied for a study permit in September, got approval letter in September, but sticker on passport stamp 8 October 2022 and landed in December 2022. Am I eligible for 40 hours a week? Excellent question. So I'm sure a lot of students coming to Canada are going to have the same question. So there was this change. So right now you can see actually this is actually the old the old web page saying they can work 20 hours per week. But as many of you know, there was a change about those who can work more than 20 hours per week. So let's take a look here, and really it has to do with the date that you apply. So it's not the date that you were issued the study permit, but it's the date that you received your application for the study permit, including extensions on or before October 7th, 2022 is the date of the application. It's not the date that you receive your study permit, and you must have an off-campus work authorization on your study permit. So Nikhil, at the very bottom, you're going to see it's going to mention, it's going to say at the very bottom whether or not you're allowed to work off-campus, right? So it might be like in accordance with section 186FV, 186F, 186V, or 186W. So take a look at that. There must be various conditions, and then either be in Canada or coming to Canada by December 31st, 2023. So coming to Canada this year. So, we don't give legal advice. We just give legal information, but here are the rules, and you can assess yourself whether or not you can work more than 20 hours a week. Obviously, if you want to speak with us, actually have us review your study permit application, the conditions, and so on. I'm more than happy to do so in a consultation. All right. We don't necessarily take the questions as they come, and try to take the most helpful questions. And I already see so many people have their questions lined up. So let's get right to it. All right. Jaspreet Singh says, hi, good morning. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody. Express entry draw resuming date. CRS score assumption, please. You know what? If I had the secret answer, I'd be really, really popular, right? Everyone would want to know what I have to say and what the next draw is going to be. But listen, here's a brief overview, right? So we know that last draw took place November 23rd. We know there were non-program specific, so Canadian Experience Class, Foreign Skilled Workers, Provincial Nominee Programs, right? So anything that works under express entry. We know the last score was 491. So let's take a look here, guys. So right now we know that it was happening every 2 weeks, and we know they were taking about 4,700 individuals, and we know the CRS score was slowly coming down by about 3 or 4 points per draw. So super important here that you have your express entry application in, because to be honest, we don't know when it's going to restart. What we do know is that if we go by the every 2 week calculation, right, there was supposed to be a draw December 7th, December 21st, and there was supposed to be one yesterday if we follow this 2 week pattern. In reality, we know that anything can happen, right? Anything can happen. They could do a big draw today. They could do a big draw tomorrow. They could take 10,000 individuals, right? Or they could continue with this every 2 week, 5,000 individuals. Here's what we do know. The new year means new immigration plans. You may have heard about it online. You may have heard about Canada welcoming over 460,000 permanent residents. And in this case, we know that they're going to be taking more immigrants than they took last year. And we know that they need to start express entry relatively back up if they want to hit their target of, I think it's 85 or 86,000 for federal skilled worker in CC and about 100,000 for PNP. So what we do know is that it's a new year, new targets. They have to restart. If you actually go also to the express entry page, so if we just type here on the express entry and we take a look here, you're going to see a warning now. When you go about how express entry works, there should be a warning talking about the previous tech issues that they've had. I think it's only on some pages, but there is a warning that says that they actually fixed most of, there it is. So they fixed most of the technical issues. They're still having some technical issues to do with some express entry profiles and knocks, but we do know that the majority, what IRCC is telling us, has been fixed. So fingers crossed, guys. We have a lot of people waiting for ITAs. And the most important thing you can do right now is reviewing making sure that I have all the proper documents to make sure that you can apply for express entry. All right, Haydar says, good morning. Any updates regarding full-time work during study period for PR purposes later? Good question, right? So there was announced for the post-graduation work permits, right, about the eligibility to do with, this was last week, but the eligibility for postgraduate work permits if, for example, a student left Canada during their studies because of COVID, or if a student needed to go to part-time or breaks in studies. So there's new rules on that. There's a whole video. If you look at last week's live Q&A where we talked about it for about half an hour, but to talk specifically about, is the period of study for PR purposes later, let's head on over to the ministerial instructions. We don't actually know, it's not confirmed, right, what's going to happen. And we've already seen some small changes taking place for the Canadian experience class. So if we go here and go outside, if we go here for Canadian experience, take a look at the Canadian experience. What is going on here? Canadian work experience. You'll see here that the last changes that took place sometime in November, the last changes that took place actually had to do with these changes here. Where is it? It's an exemption that allows certain periods because of COVID. I think one of the periods is August. Yeah, so we've already seen that some of the requirements don't apply to foreign nationals in regards to Canadian educational credentials between whether or not the program was obtained in part or in full by distance learning, right? So we know that education is eligible for CEC. But Haydar, to answer your specific questions, if you work full-time as a student, is it going to count for express entry Canadian experience class? Right now, it does not. And there's no indication that it will. Again, a lot of the changes regarding COVID and education were already put in place in the last ministerial instructions that took place, that were in place between here. And, if there is any changes, you're most likely going to see it here in the instructions. So keep an eye on this if you're curious, but we'll see what will happen. Manpreet says, hi, Mark. Mark does his live Q&As on Wednesdays. This is Cedric, but more than happy to jump in. Manpreet says, hi, Mark. I was expecting a draw yesterday, but it didn't happen. What could be the exact reason behind this? How about PNP draws? So the exact reason is glitches switching from the NOC 2016 to NOC 2021. This has been confirmed by IRCC. We know that most of the issues have been fixed, as we talked about, and we know that they're working hard to get it fixed. PNP draws, they stopped when they changed from NOC to tier. However, most of them, as of November 16th, continue with PNP draws. But keep in mind, there's PNP draws like express entry base. You have non-PNPs as well that have their own process of drawing, right? For example, the Alberta Opportunity Stream, or even some streams in Ontario have PNPs that are not linked to express entry, and those are continuing. Sebastian says, good morning. Happy New Year, Sebastian. Good morning and Happy New Year to you too. We have Sean says, bonjour. Bonjour à vous aussi. Amongst us says, hello, Cedric. Hi. We have Manpreet who also says hi. So nice. So apologies for the technical issues earlier. So happy you've now joined me. Shadan says, hi, Cedric. How is the file assessed when spouse is added after confirmation of permanent residence, but before landing? Are all the checks eligibility performed again for the sponsor also, or just the spouse who is added? Shadan, excellent question. Excellent question. And it's a little bit tricky. I'll be quite honest with you, but I'd recommend you book a consult, talk more about how we can how they assess applications, because it can get a little bit tricky, as we're going to talk about. In short, they will be looking at your eligibility again. So now that you're a family of two, it changes for federal skilled workers the amount of money that you need to support yourself. So you might have a request for additional funds to show your proof of funds, because you're going to have a higher threshold now. And keep in mind that if a family member is inadmissible, you can be inadmissible as well. So let's go take a look here about assessing applications for under section 11.2. And what we're curious about is if we go all the way to the bottom here is changes in circumstances. Oh, why is this like that? There we go. Move this over. Changes in circumstances. Changes in circumstances declared after EAPR has been submitted. So you have two types of changes, right? You have the change where you submit your application, and then 6 months later, because of long delays, you've been married, and then you're going to update your EAPR application. But we also have change of circumstances that took place before. In other words, you did not declare a spouse, but now you did declare your spouse by web form after you apply. So there's changes that occur before you apply, changes that you occur after you've applied, right, are going to be assessed differently, right? So a change that occurred before the applicant submitted the APR is going to have the whole application, and that would cause the applicant to be refused. So here we're talking about it's going to recalculate your points, right? If you're married before and you should have said you were married before, they should have calculated your points a specific way for the ITA. It could make your application refused. If we're talking about no longer meeting the requirements, right? So you don't meet the minimum eligibility requirements, you can think about proof of funds. You can also think about CRS points. It could also result in the application being rejected. Now we have change of family compositions being after you have the EAPR. So here we're talking about you were single, you're not in a common law relationship, you submit your EAPR because of delays in COVID and whatnot. 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, you get married. This is a change in family composition, right? And that's going to be assessed differently, right? Applicants are to inform IRCC immediately if their change of composition has changed. So birth of a child, marriage, or divorce, super, super important. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but there's a big difference between before and after. And as I mentioned, probably best to get a consult to learn about more in detail about how you can actually, add a spouse, the change happened before or after, and how does it impact your express entry? Like, you don't really have a choice. If you're married, you have to update IRCC, right? But let's talk about, providing proper documents, providing proof of funds, and explaining that, if it gets rejected, looking at how we can prepare the next application for it not to be rejected. All right. When is the next draw, Mohammed? This is the golden question we don't know, right? So we thought maybe tomorrow. I have someone contacted me today saying, what about mid-January? I need to get a PR before mid-January. And the truth is we don't know. What we do know is in the last few weeks, IRCC has fixed a lot of technical issues, right? We also know that they have new immigration plans. They want to take immigrants to Canada, and they got to get on it. They got to start issuing ITAs if they want to meet their goal. All right. Sadim says, hi, Cedric. And Sahith says, do we need to represent personal history in order wise or random order out of personal history is okay? Sahith, read the instructions very carefully. I think they're going to talk about having an order to the personal history section. I think ideally you want to have it in a chronological order, right? So from either A to Z or Z to A to make it easy for everyone to understand, to make sure there's no gaps in time. This being said, if you have like 25 entries and you've caught one in the middle, definitely add it and make sure that you respect the instructions. And the reason I say respect the instructions is because they change from paper-based applications a few years ago to now instructions for the MyGC key, now talking about personal history sections for express entry portals. And now they're using a different portal for this. So just read the instructions because they change. But generally speaking, yes, please have a chronological order. Sean says, I think we can write a letter of explanation with ChatGPT. I tried with my situation and it generated a pretty decent letter in need of some minor corrections. That's interesting. So ChatGPT is a program by OpenAI. It writes code really well. Anyways, that's pretty funny, Sean. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it. I don't recommend it. Don't endorse it. I just thought it was interesting to take a look at that comment. Among says, am I the only one who thinks that the silver lining to no draws is that they will clear the EE backlog quicker than expected? Interesting. Yeah, I mean. That is interesting. I mean, keep in mind that when we're talking about the delays on the IRCC website, you have like the pre-COVID and the post-COVID. So I think right now, most new applications are being processed in like 4, 6, or 8 months. And the big delay on the IRCC webpage is because, the group of COVID applications that were received when IRCC was closed because of COVID, when embassies abroad were closed, a lot of those are still being input in that delay, right? So if you look at, some of the delays, we're talking 18 months or 30 months. This is really for COVID applications. Most new applications by experience, into Canada spousal, express entry outside of Canada, inside Canada, Canadian experience class, are taking closer to 4 to 6 months. But again, this is just by experience. And, I'm just sharing a little bit of my legal practice. Don't rely on this, right? Don't plan your life around getting an ITA in 6 months. Because that's IRCC says it takes much longer than that. Unique Promise says, can I submit a letter of explanation from a letter of acceptance from a different DLI So designated learning institute via web form after receiving PPR notification. Interesting. So I know I was looking at this yesterday actually, for study permits, DLI, and there's some specific rules to do with changing your program before or changing your program after. So let's go take a look here. So changing your school program, right? So changing if you're outside Canada before coming to Canada. If you change your DLI before coming to Canada and you don't let us know, you won't be allowed to board your flight. Well, there we go. There's the answer to your question. If your application is still in progress, you can tell us, change the DLI by submitting a new letter of acceptance. If your application has been approved. So this is different rules based on where you are in the process. The PPR notification, I believe your application is still in progress. In this case, you should definitely inform IRCC. Again, this is just general legal information. Review this page, right? If you want legal advice, let's look at date you applied. If you want us to give you advice and say, I would do X, Y, Z, definitely reach out. But we always recommend to follow the IRCC instructions because, well, you want to be allowed to board your flight, right? So listen, we'll just leave it at that. So Hith Tumamla says, I'm doing 3 full-time jobs at the same time as submitting my application. Is it fine? I am on open work permit. Yeah, listen, if you're on an open work permit, you might have other conditions on your open work permit and whatnot. But generally speaking, yeah, if you have an open work permit, you can have more than one job. And in terms of express entry, keep in mind they're only counting 30 hours per week maximum. And for express entry Canada experience class, you are able to put like 6 months in one job plus 6 months in another job, or have 2 part-time jobs to make up that 30 hours a week to get to that 1 year requirement of full-time Canadian work experience, right? So listen, it's generally speaking, an open work permit, you're not tied to one employer, right? But are there conditions, right? Does the work experience qualify for express entries in a skilled position, right? In a tier 0, 1, 2, or 3? Is it in Canada? Is it for a Canadian company? These are all questions that you'd want to take a look at for express entry or PR. And again, any specific conditions that you have right now as well. All right, how long to get offer letter? I'm sorry, I think I fully understand. Feel free to re-ask your questions. Offer letter for job. Oh, can I submit? Sorry, they're two different. How long to get offer letter? Talking about an invitation to apply, you could take. That's what we've been talking about, right? We don't know when the draws are resuming. In terms of, I don't know what you mean by offer letter. Just go ahead and go to the next question, but feel free to re-ask your question. Ravinder Singh says, I'm a chartered accountant from India, age 60. I plan to come on PR in Canada. What are my employment scope there? Well, so when we're looking at a work permit, right? You need a job offer, and you also need, you most likely need a labor market impact assessment, right? Where a company is going to be demonstrating that they need to hire a foreign national, right? Because no Canadians or PR are available to do the work, right? So really, you're gonna have to find a job before you come to Canada if you're looking to get a work permit with an LMIA. Now, there's LMIA exemptions for with intercompany transfers, and get more into the exemptions for LMIAs. Like the postgraduate work permit is a type of LMIA exemption, but keep in mind that this requires you going to study inside Canada. Some of them require you to be your spouse to have an LMIA. Some of them require you to be in a specific country or have a certain nationality in a country. So it's in terms of immigration law, right? This is what needs to be done as a big picture before you come to Canada to work. In terms of your employment scope here, I really don't know. Oyankwada says, is it a good sign if days after medical pass I receive ADR to refill and update my Schedule A and family information of mine and my spouse for TR to PR? Yeah, so listen, I mean, generally speaking, IRCC would not be wasting their time if they were just going to reject your application, right? If there's a critical mistake, you're ineligible, they would not waste their time with asking you to complete additional forms. Now, keep in mind the TR to PR took place now over a year ago, right? Like more than a year ago. So a lot of the information has changed. And so a lot of people are getting these requests to update your information. So yeah, generally speaking, this is good news. no news is good news. It doesn't mean your application is going to be approved, but so far they haven't rejected your application. So someone touched it, they passed through it, and they wanted updated information. So that's always good. And yeah, just make sure you really fill out in detail the Schedule A. If you need more space to have a separate form. If you have any questions, obviously do reach out. All right, Anish says, hi. I am working in Canada for more than 2 years now in express entry pool, but as you know, the points thing going on. So going for LMIA, will that change my profile from CC to FSW or anything? Yeah, so when you have a qualifying job offer, it will give you an extra 50 points for your express entry application. But it's not going to change. So in your eligibility for your profile, you might be eligible for more than one stream. So you might be eligible for the Canadian Experience class. You might be eligible for the Federal Skilled Workers. And the way it's going to work is that they're going to look at your application first on CEC and then look at your app. And if you fail CEC for whatever reason, then assess your application under FSW. So, to answer your question, no, it's just going to give you more express entry points. But this is it's just such a common mistake that people make. It is so important to properly prepare this. You don't just need the LMIA, you also need a job offer, right? So my colleague Alicia, so on our website, guys, it's called the Health Immigration Law, and head up here to the blogs, and it's pretty great. I mean, we write all of this ourselves from A to Z, and you'll see here that in the a blog that my colleague Alicia wrote about job offers and how to claim it for your express entry. Let's find it here. So there we go. Can I claim CRS points for a job offer in my express entry application? So take a look at this. Anish, I'm not going to repeat it because it's so detailed, but there's various conditions that apply. And don't forget, you need a job offer, the LMIA and the job offer. And here are different scenarios according to the immigration and refugee regulations that are applicable to you. And again, more information there. But yeah, listen, you can definitely get more points if you get the LMIA, but the LMIA is employer driven. It's illegal to pay for an LMIA. It's illegal for an employer to say, I'll give you the LMIA if you give us $10,000, $5,000, $20,000. We've heard some crazy numbers. So it's illegal for an employer to do that. It's illegal for you to pay someone for an LMIA as well, like a consultant or someone who tells you to promise you work, right? So it really has to be a business that has a legitimate business need that is looking to hire people and they can't find PRs or Canadian, and they go through the process of obtaining an LMIA. Sebastian says, hi, Sebastian says, hope you had wonderful holidays with your friends and family. Thank you so much. It's very kind. And follow-up question, Sebastian says, here's a question. I requested LMIA notes a year ago, haven't gotten anything yet. Do you think this is normal? Can immigration refuse to share GMS notes with applicants? Thanks. So Sebastian, this is not normal. It is taking like 3 to 6 months for GCMS notes. Although in practice, they should be doing access to information requests in 30 days. They're just way behind because a lot of requests during COVID. So no, this is not normal. You can do a new ATIP, and keep in mind that you can also make a complaint at the Office of the Commissioner of Information in Canada for government departments that you think if it's worthy of a complaint. You can take a look on their website to see how to do that. But just letting you know, just sharing some legal information about the different processes. So definitely redo the ATIP, right? You can inquire with them about why redo the ATIP, inquire by web form about where is the ATIP, and then option C would be making a complaint about IRCC. Oyeka says is a good sign. Yeah, we've already answered this. All right. Sean says I got my full French results. CLB 6.366. Wow, that was so close of getting the CLB 5 in every category. So, well done. Honestly, those of you who are studying French to come to Canada, well done. Let's go take a look here at the ministerial instructions. Let's take a look here at ministerial instructions respecting express entry. So here's why French is so important, guys. So you will get points in terms of French. So here we're going to call it secondary, what do they call it? Secondary programs. Let's go to language. So French is so important because you're going to get points if you have a second official language. So first official language, you get points, right, based on each level. Great, right? And if you have a second official language proficiency, right, you would get more points. So what Sean is after here, Sean is not after the 1 or 2 points or the 3 or 4 points you can get from doing a CLB, from getting CLB 5s and 6s, right? What Sean is after is all the way here at the bottom, guys. If you take a look, we have points for French language proficiency. These are like bonus points because Canada wants to encourage French speakers to establish themselves outside of Quebec. So if Sean here, French Sean gets, has under subsection, you get the proficiency in language CLB 5 or higher. So if the results of language tests by institution indicate that their French proficiency in language is assessed at a 7 or higher in all language skills, right? And they have a minimum of CLB 5 in English, he can get up to 50 additional points for his French. So this is huge. And as some of you may know, if you speak French in Canada, it might give you more employment opportunities, but this is what Sean is after, are these extra points in French. And keep in mind that the language also scales, not secondary language, but the first language also scales with what's called transferability points. So a combination of language and work experience. So here's a combination of Canadian and foreign work experience, get some bonus points because of that. But here's a combination of foreign language and official language proficiency. So here we're not just talking about the French, but we're also talking about the English. But in this case, if you have a CLB 7 in every skilled area and with 1 or more out of 9, boom, bonus points, right? If you have a CLB 9 in every language, you're going to get even more points. So language is so important. And I think that's an area that is so underestimated by people is when we talk about language score, right? It's not just the 1 or 2 or the 5 extra points, but really these transferability, these bonus points. That's where the money's at. That's where the good points are at. And this could be the difference between getting getting an ITA for next week, assuming there's a draw next week or in a few months, right? Is really that CRS right now because it's so competitive. All right. Take a look here. All right. My mother's name has been blank on my bank account since I was a child. As it relates to proof of funds, will this be a problem to IRCC? So proof of funds, right? So we have proof of funds for the federal skilled immigrants, but you might also have proof of funds for, let's say, a study permit or in some cases even work permits, depending on the country. But so here we're just talking about proof of funds for express entry. So not proof of funds for study permits because that is different, right? And to be honest, it could, without an explanation, right? If you show your mother's bank account and you just submit this as proof of funds, it could be an issue. But let's take a look here. So the amount of money you need to support yourself is calculated under family size, right? So they're here, your spouse, yourself, your children. This is how they calculate your income. And here we have the table showing the minimum amounts that you need to immigrate to Canada. Keep in mind that this is going to, as we talked about, right? If you get married after you apply, this might actually increase. If you have a child after you apply during processing, this might actually increase. So let's take a look here about what they accept for proof. So funds must be readily available to you, right? So this is important. So having a house is not, a house that you're saying you can sell or whatever is not going to be, readily available for you, right? So you can't. The second option, you can't borrow this money from another person. So that's super important, right? So if someone is giving you money, it must really be a gift. We usually recommend to get a gift deed. It cannot be lending money. You can count your spouse's money together, right? The funds must be available when you apply, when you issue. So both at the time of the application and at the time that you get your visa, and you must have access to the money. Here's what the letter itself must have and the updates of funds. So here it talks about combining, your spouse's account and your account. It doesn't talk about having a family member's account, right? Being just your account. See whether or not you could have this transferred to your own bank account. See whether or not a letter of explanation is sufficient, right? To explain what is going on, maybe an affidavit, right? But listen, it can get a little bit tricky, and this is definitely not what IRCC recommends, both on the proof of funds page and we take a look at the completeness check. The completeness check talks about what is needed for express entry applications. And when we look at the proof of funds, right? Here they talk about having an official letter of your bank, right? Must be printed on company letterhead. That has your account number, name, and so on. And here it says other documents may also be requested as necessary. So listen, this is probably a risk you want to avoid if you can get your own bank account, right? It's definitely something you want to avoid. If not, can your mother make you a gift deed, right? Give you the money to your own bank account? Are the funds going to be readily available? These are all things that we look at for proof of funds. Now, just giving general advice, take a look, general legal information, take a look at these pages. Again, this is not legal advice. All right, Shang Song has an interesting question. Says, it seems that for the purpose of OINP, French-speaking skilled worker stream, does count work experience while under full-time student status if assessed under express entry FSW. Is this correct? So I can definitely answer the question under FSW, which I'm most familiar with. Obviously, PNPs as well, but it would take some time to look at this PNP in particular in the specific program. And there's a lot of PNPs, and just to make this as helpful to everyone in detail, I'm just going to focus on the express entry federal skilled part. So let's go take a look here at the ministerial instructions. Again, we keep going back to this because this is the legalese about points. And you're absolutely correct, Sean. So one of the big differences, if we look at foreign work experience, one of the big differences is exactly that foreign work experience does not doesn't have this exception or this requirement that, it's not at the time that you're a full-time student. So you'll see here, right, work in excess, and then it moves on. Here are the requirements, obviously, that you meet the NOC. And you're going to see here that some of the requirements are paid a wage, 10 years preceding period, right? There was full-time work experience or the equivalent of full-time work experience through part-time gigs, but there's no requirement for federal skilled worker that the work experience is not during full-time studies. This only applies to the Canadian work experience, where we're going to see if we scroll down here, section 15, we scroll down, we're going to see it has this extra requirements, right? So that we just saw the foreign work experience doesn't have this. And we're going to see here that this requires that the experience while someone who's a full-time student is not going to be calculated for Canadian work experience. And this is also confirmed if you go over here to the eligibility section. And we scroll down under the Federal Skilled Worker Program. It should say, here we're talking about, there we go. So here, let's take a look here about the skilled work experience. Oh, they just changed this. Yeah, not too long ago. Here they're going to talk about, this is the page I'm most used. So here we go. Here's the money. Here's the answer, Sean. So work experience gained while you were studying may count towards the minimum requirement if the work was. So this is a huge difference in the Canadian experience class. So if you're a student abroad, you worked part-time, let's say as a restaurant manager, you're part-time as an auditor, a technical sales warehouse, right? A skilled tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, you're able to get a reference letter, right? It was 1 year continuous. So big difference from CC and FSW, right? It needs to be continuous, right? You can't put 2 jobs together to make the 1 year. If you were working part-time, which you probably were during your studies, it just means that you're in the same job for like 1.5 years or 2 years to get to this magic number of 1,560. And I think, Sean, one of the biggest value we have for our clients and people like you is really going through your work experience, making sure, what is going on with my webcam? Going through the work experience in a consult. You can go to our website called Whole Immigration. My colleague Alicia, Chanel, and myself, and we have Mark here at the bottom. Now, do keep in mind that I do telework abroad. So if you're abroad and have questions about immigrating to Canada, I'm going to be available on your time zone. You take a look here at different areas that I work on. I also do a lot of judicial reviews, so rejected applications, people who come to me who do their own applications or other lawyers and consultants, and obviously express entry, right? The biggest value we have is sitting down with you and at the very minimum, going over the eligibility requirements to make sure that you are eligible to apply. And secondly, right, actually reviewing your whole application together, making sure that all the supporting documents, that everything makes sense. So listen, Sean, Excellent question. It comes up once in a while. And there we go. We found the answer to your question again. Just general information. If you want to know really like, does your job in XYZ country qualify for federal skilled worker and receive legal advice? Book a consult. All right, Yusuf says, Cedric, we're all worried about the pause in express entry draws and the constant changes. Like I'm actually reconsidering an LMIE job offer I got at a tier 0 position. I'm scared I'll never transition into PR. Interesting, Yusuf. Interesting. I mean, briefly, a lot of the changes have benefited applicants. And I know some people have been left out by the TR to PR about a year ago. I know some people don't qualify for the post-graduation work permit extensions, both in 2021 and 2022. I know there's changes with the knock and the tier, but overall, the changes, I have to admit, have been benefiting applicants, benefiting people who want to come to Canada. Before COVID, so going back to 2019, there was no way someone could extend their post-graduation work permit. Like it just didn't exist. It would never have happened, except if your passport was expiring before the expiry of the post-graduation work permit. But the idea that you would get like 4 years or 5 years after study did not exist. Secondly, the TR to PR is super beneficial to applicants, right? People with like who had never had a chance to become permanent residents in Canada now had a chance. Express entry changes, they've been generous in terms of studying, they've been generous in terms of how they're going to count experience and whatnot. And again, you may not have benefited from the policy, or you may not have benefited from any policy, but objectively, a lot of the policies and a lot of the changes introduced in the last 2 or 3 years have benefited applicants. Most recently, students can work more than 20 hours a week. They can work 40 hours, right? If you meet some conditions, as we talked earlier on the live Q&A. So if anything, right, I think that it's encouraging that IRCC is looking at the current changes in landscape and looking at how they can provide and help applicants. So, criticism is fair. They've had long delays, right? Criticism is warranted, right? How are you going to improve if you never get criticized, right? How are we going to improve if no one's recommending different ways to do things? Right. But anyways, if we're just focusing on this question, I think generally it has helped applicants. I think that if you do get a tier 1 or tier 0 position on an LMIE job offer, keep in mind that your LMIE is going to give you additional points for express entry. After a year or two, you might be able to transition to PR. And generally speaking, compared to a lot of other countries that have immigration, you can become a permanent resident in 2 or 3 years, apply for citizenship and depending how you calculate your time in Canada and tests and whatnot, and let's say another 2 or 3 years after you get your PR, it's relatively quick. They have a lot of programs that overall have benefited applicants, and the immigration is still very competitive inside Canada, although they have faced a few hiccups here and there. But anyways, I'm critical of IRCC. I go to court against IRCC, and we write blogs and we go back and forth on IRCC, but I would have difficulty in people rejecting job offers and LMIEs because all the changes that are happening. And this is part of the reason why we do the live Q&As, is to tell people about changes and try to educate more people, because we truly see the need to do that, right? New temporary policies are announced, new things are announced all the time, and I hope it's helpful. But good question, Yusuf. And I'm sure somebody at IRCC is looking into this and wondering if all the changes are doing more good than bad. All right, Joanne Reep says, can I extend my 30 days period on medical submissions on express entry application through contacting IRCC? Interesting. So on the letter that you received, it might have more information. I don't know if it's still the case about. I don't know if it's the case about. I just got one recently, actually yesterday, for another client. I don't know if it's still the case where they tell you at the bottom of the letter what to do. But for COVID, for a period of time, if you're not able to get an appointment because of COVID, yeah, they did extend it. I'm looking at I'm looking at a recent one. So again, yours might be different, and it's general information, but it says here to contact them, by web form if they're not able to get the medical examination. So it's possible that the closest doctor within like a 5-hour drive is only taking appointments for March. Well, this doesn't make any sense. You're never going to get your medical examination unless you fly to somewhere else to get it. So definitely inform IRCC by web form as soon as possible. All right, Manpreet says, Cedric, is it true there's an agreement between IRCC and PNPs? IRCC is obliged to conduct express entry draws and invite nominated candidates with the pause of 3 consecutive draws. Honestly, I don't know. I can go take a look at the interprovincial agreements on express entry. So the IRCC has agreements with various provinces, right? They have, again, I don't know what's going on with my webcam, but they have agreements with different countries, different provinces for immigration. Some of them do touch on express entry and some don't. So maybe some provinces do have these agreements and some don't. But I keep in mind that there's no set time for express entry draws. No, IRCC has never committed to every 2 weeks. They can stop them at any time. They can resume them at any time. They can take 10,000 people. They can take 0 people. So just on your question itself, we just need to keep in mind that IRCC has no obligation really to do draws in a specific manner. So I have difficulty, again, I could be wrong, but I have difficulty understanding that they would have this agreement on 3 consecutive draws if there's no rule in the first place to have draws, right? Or have consecutive draws, right? They could do it once a year if they wanted and invite, 100,000 people if they wanted, or could do it twice a year with 50,000 draws. They could if they wanted to, right? But here are their agreements, and let's take Canada's most populous province, Ontario. Here are all the agreements with Ontario. Some are archived, some aren't archived. I know. Let's take a look here. Extension. Let's take a look at their 2017 agreement, and see is there express entry. Yeah, so express entry doesn't pop up. So, Manpreet, I to be honest, I don't know the answer to your question. I haven't heard about this. It's possible that one province for one program has an agreement, but what are consecutive draws? I couldn't even tell you because they're because it's like there's no law or regulation that forces them to do draws. And the last few weeks, if anything, have proven that they're not compelled to do draws. But they do have the immigration level plans where they try to commit to a certain number of individuals every year, but this doesn't commit to consecutive draws and whatnot. I've already answered this. All right, Shadan says, hi Cedric, an agent told me not to add my to-be spouse after COP and before landing, rather sponsor my spouse after landing. Could you please shed some light on the issue? So I don't know if you mean agent like an IRCC agent or agent like a ghost consultant, right? Someone who doesn't have a license to provide immigration advice, or if you're talking about agent like a consultant or an immigration lawyer you're dealing with, that would be a representative. So it's tough to comment on who is this agent, but just to remind you, right, only immigration lawyers or immigration consultants who are licensed through a body in Canada can provide advice on immigration matters. We talked, Shendan, we talked about the assessment, assessing a 11.2, right? So we talked about this earlier on the podcast. You can't just choose not to declare a spouse because it's better for your application and do this and do that, right? It's not how it works. We looked here at the application, right? We looked here and it says that change of family compositions, right? When you get married, when someone have a new baby, that you must inform IRCC. Now, if a spouse, you could put, for example, a to-be spouse is not a spouse, right? If you're not living common law, it's not a spouse. If, for example, you have a spouse and you put them as accompanying, right? So you include them in the application as accompanying. Then we talk about the way that your CRS score is going to be assessed differently than if you didn't have a spouse. But if you get married, you need to disclose it. You can sponsor your spouse after landing in Canada, but you're still going to have some. You have to make a whole separate spousalship application to prove your genuineness of your marriage and that you guys are not doing this for immigration purposes. So listen, it's tough. I mean, I'd love to give you legal advice, sit down with you and chat about this, the different implications about adding spouses and not adding spouses. But you must declare if you are a spouse or in a common law relationship. If after you submit your express entry profile, you're now married, you must declare it. There's no option. You have to declare it. Whether or not they're going to be accompanying or non-accompanying, that's going to be a question, right? That may impact your CRS score. So I'm not sure if this is a question, the way that you asked your question, that's making me, that's throwing me off of it. But yeah, that's the general overview. And now my webcam is blurry, but let's push on through. I don't know why it does this. In any event, let's go on to the next question. Maybe if I go back to the intro, if I stop my webcam for a moment, and turn it back on. Change your webcams. Sorry, guys. There's no doubt. There we go. No doubt that we do this live in real time. All right. Ikua says, I want to know if you apply for PR, how long does it take to receive approval? Talked about it earlier on the website, earlier on the live Q&A. The IRCC times, depending on the programs, anywhere between 15 to 30 months. But in practice, we know that a lot of the applications being submitted now being closer to 4, 6, or 8 months because there's different processing for old COVID files and new applications that are coming in. Andy says, hi, good morning, happy new year. Can you please tell me when CC draws will resume? My friend's open work permit expires on January 12th. What to do if draw doesn't resume before January 12th? So excellent question, Nandini, and encourage your friend. They can consider going on our website here, Whole Immigration, and booking a consult to talk more about in detail. With me all the way at the bottom, the truth is that we don't know when the CSC draws will continue. We thought maybe one was going to be tomorrow. We knew a lot of issues have been fixed with express entry. Maybe we're going to see a big draw tomorrow, maybe next week. We really, really don't know. Could, for example, your friend, could they get a sponsor, right? And get sponsored. If your friend's married or in a common law relationship, right? A genuine relationship, you could look at exploring a sponsorship, right? You could look at getting an LMIA, but this would take much longer. In any event, we always recommend to abide by immigration rules. So either switching to extending your status in Canada, right? So if you get express entry, the bridging open work permit is going to be there for you. An LMIA work permit, but probably too late for an LMIA work permit. If they speak French, there's a francophone mobilité, which they're allowed to get a work permit without an LMIA if they're outside of Quebec. And if there's no LMIA, there's no French, there's no express entry, there's no sponsorship, either leave Canada at the end of the stay or apply for a visitor record to allow you to extend your stay inside Canada. You can't work or study, but you can extend your stay. But it can get a little bit tricky with doing a sponsorship if someone doesn't have a valid status, if someone's in maintained status. It can get tricky again for applying for a work permit inside Canada if you don't have a work permit. So if you take a look here. And I'm starting to run out of time here, but if you take a look at the bridging open work permit, and just switch my screen here, when we go to permanent residence using express entry, you're going to see here that only those in Canada who have a valid work permit, have maintained status as a worker, so has made another application for work permit, or is eligible to restore status. This is within 90 days of the work permit expiring, being able to get a work permit. So, it's tricky to tell you exactly what to do without a meeting with you and actually knowing your case, and B, I can't give you legal advice on a live YouTube, but general legal information. Find a status inside Canada, whether it's going to be extending or visitor status, or just leave Canada at the end of your stay, and then apply for express entry and come back with PR. Always an option. All right, guys. Wow, so many questions. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. We really, really enjoy you guys. Let me just take a look here at my schedule. I think I only have another 5 or 10 minutes. I gotta go, but we have another live Q&A that's going to take place. We have some scheduled on the channel. We also do them on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So thank you so much for joining us. We love sharing legal information. Oh, there's at least a good 10 to 15 questions I can't get to, but let's take a look here. Lovey Dovey says, after EAPR submission, does the police clearance certificate that was submitted becomes invalid if you leave Canada to visit home country and return before decision? So the requirement, excellent question, Lovey Dovey, the requirement for a police certificate if you take a look here, is only going to be in the case where someone lives in a country for 6 months or more in a row. So in the case where, for example, you left the UK in 2017, you came to Canada, you worked, studied, blah, 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 you submit your express entry application, and now you returned to the UK for a few weeks during Christmas or the New Year's, and then you come back to Canada, right? So the requirement is only for 6 months in a row. So that's in a row, right? So that should be okay in my case, in my example. In your case, right? If you lived somewhere else for 6 months, right? So it's important to make a web form, right? To update IRCC on change of addresses, right? Super, super important. And on where you currently reside, both for the passport request, both for just the processing of your application. And in doing so, if you lived somewhere else for more than 6 months, it's possible, right, that IRCC would ask you for a police certificate, because they always, they can always ask you for more information. But generally speaking, your application, kind of locks in at the time that you apply. This means that, if a language test expires, if an educational credential expires, in these cases, it's okay, because when you applied, it was valid. And this page here is going to talk more in detail about the validity of work permit applications. If you just Google this, look at our website and look at police certificates. But generally speaking, if it's 6 months, less than 6 months in a row, no requirements. Over 6 months, right? Definitely update IRCC, and you might be asked for a new police certificate. Again, just general information about this. Listen, guys, I really, really, really see so many great questions. I really wish that I had the time to get through them all. I have another 3 or 4 calls today, so I got to start preparing for my calls. I got to start reviewing my stuff and get ready. I'm just going to take one final random question here. A generic nickname, I love it, says, after receiving Canada PR, you can later move to Quebec if necessary. However, Quebec has its own program. Could you please explain how you should apply via Quebecois system and in what cases? This is probably the worst question I could pick. And generic nickname, worst question for me, because I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer, so I'm licensed at the Law Society in Ontario. You can actually see this is my license here, right on the live Q&A to practice law in Ontario. And as an Ontario lawyer, it allows me to practice Ontario immigration. So law is federal, IRCC and all that is federal law. It allows me to practice in all the provinces as it relates to Canadian immigration law, but I can't practice. I'm not competent. I'm not licensed to practice inside Quebec, right? Just off the top of my head, the Certificat de Sélection du Québec, the CSQ, is going to be, it's a whole different beast in terms of how to apply to Quebec. If you speak French, if you don't speak French and whatnot. So unfortunately, I really can't comment on Quebec because to be honest, I don't know much and it's not my area of expertise. Certificat d'acceptation du Québec or Certificat de Sélection du Québec, definitely going to look at that on yourself, or speak with a Quebec licensed immigration lawyer. All right, guys, very, very last question here. Geez, some really good questions. Really hard to really pick the best question here. All right, Hamza. All right. So do I need a letter of explanation if applying as a non-accompanying spouse? Wow. tough questions, guys. So you can't really game the IRCC system for CRS points and be in Canada with a spouse and then decide that in the application, you're just going to put them as non-accompanying to boost your express entry score in the hopes that you're later going to sponsor them inside Canada, right? So does this make sense? So for express entry, they calculate your CRS points. And if you're married, 40 of your points go to your spouse and they calculate your spouse's points, which generally means you're going to lose a little bit of CRS points, from 10 to 20 or 15 points, right? But you can't just decide to say, no, I'm going to, this round, my wife is not going to get their express entry and we're going to put them as non-accompanying and I'm going to get more CRS points and qualify for the next draw. So so if you're going to list your spouse, if you're in Canada right now, living with your spouse and you're going to put them as non-accompanying, you really should have good reasons for this. Like your spouse is packing their stuff and going back to Canada for the next few years, right? They have a job opportunity outside Canada, an ill family member, and they have no intention of permanently residing inside Canada, right? This would really be like this is what just comes to mind. But see, accompanying spouse means a foreign national spouse who is accompanying him or her in Canada and who is not a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. So your spouse accompanying you inside Canada, they're an accompanying spouse. You can't game the system. So yeah, Hamza, 100%. If you're going to put your spouse for an in Canada application as non-accompanying, or even outside Canada as non-accompanying, I mean, you should probably explain, because it's atypical. It's not common that people are going to do this. So there we go, guys. And again, there's no rules or laws on this. It's just this, like, you can't pick whether or not your spouse is accompanying or not. That you have to apply this definition, right, to knowing whether or not your spouse is going to be accompanying you or Canada. So there we go, guys. Another live Q&A. We have some others scheduled on the YouTube channel. Alicia does a live Q&A a few hours after me on Thursdays. Mark does his live Q&As on as well on Wednesdays, and I sometimes drop in when I have additional time. I drop in on Tuesdays. Now the camera is blurry. This is the end of the stream, guys. Thank you for joining me.